The following presentation is brought to you by Parousia. Please stay tuned at the end for more information about the many fine resources available from Parousia. In today's audio-only podcast, we hear Dr. Edward Stree's presentation titled, Marriage from Good to Great.
It is really hard to stand up against the current of a powerful river. It just wants to push you downstream. It just wants to sweep you away. And the same is true in our culture, especially when it comes to living out what God's plan is for love, for relationships between men and women, and especially in the most profound relationship of marriage. There are so many forces that are working against us, so many forces trying to get us to live in a way that is not going to bring us the joy and happiness that God wants in our relationships with the opposite sex, and especially in marriage. Think about what's happened ever since the so-called sexual revolution, where many ideas that have been percolating for a while had become mainstream in the culture. During the sexual revolution of the 1960s, many of us were told, we're just going to be happier if we can set aside religion, we set aside the church, set aside what your parents think about sexuality and love and marriage, and we just need to be free from all these things. This is what the sexual revolution told the world. We just need to be free from all of that so that we could just be ourselves. We don't need the church, we don't need tradition, we don't need religion. We just have to be ourselves, and we have to be authentic. And if I could just express myself as I really am, then I'm going to have better friendships. I'm going to have better dating relationships. I'm going to have better marriages, better families. And that's what we were told in the sexual revolution. But we know now very clearly that things aren't better. Relationships aren't better. Dating relationships aren't better than they were before. Not that they were perfect, but have things really improved? Especially when we consider the profound relationship of marriage. Are marriages better today? Is family life better today than before the sexual revolution? Again, I don't want to idealize the 1930s or 40s or 50s by any means. There were problems. But it's very clear that things are much different now. Just take, for example, the great statistic that's often quoted. What's the big statistic often quoted about marriage? About half of all marriages end in divorce. And that's a very sad statistic. And I'm not going to dwell on that today, not because it's not a real issue. It is a real issue. And I want to be clear. I have dear friends, even good Christian friends I know, who have gone through the pains of divorce. So I know how serious that is. I'm not minimizing that. And I can tell you from my work with college students and young adults around the country, many of them have experienced the pain of growing up in a divorced home, and it comes out when they're older. I know from their experiences that this is a real serious issue, but everybody always talks about that. So I'm not going to dwell on that today. What I want to talk about is what I like to call the other 50%, the marriages that stay together. How are those marriages doing? Are those marriages in which husbands and wives really feel close together? They feel like they've married their best friend? They have emotional closeness? What's happening in those marriages? Some studies show that out of all the marriages that stay together, guess how many are actually really happy ones, that they experience emotional closeness? Guess how many? 25%. About 12%. About 12%. Now just think about that. I want you to go back to math class from your high school days. Remember the pie diagram, the big circle diagram? So picture the big circle pie diagram, and half of that diagram is shaded in dark. So that would be half the marriages ending in divorce. And we're looking at the other half of the pie diagram. And then just about 12%, just a sliver of that, are marriages that are truly happy, they're emotionally close. Now, God blessed these marriages because they're staying together, and some of them are staying together in very difficult situations. They're doing it for the good of their children. They're doing it for the good of the commitment that they made to each other, and it could be quite heroic. But I think we all know that we want to do more than just stay together when we get married. We didn't sign up to just stay together. Think about this. If you see me a couple years from now and you say, "Oh, Edward Sri, it was great to see you. I remember you came and spoke to our group. You talked about marriage. How are things going with your marriage? How are things with you and Beth?" And I said, "Oh, our marriage is great. We haven't divorced yet." I mean, that's not what we're aiming for, right? It's just simply just to stay together. I mean, a great marriage isn't one that just stays together. A great marriage is one in which husband and wife grow in unity, grow in trust, grow in intimacy, communion. A great marriage is one in which husband and wife can look each other in the eye 10, 20, 30 years in their marriage and say, "I love you more now today than I did when we were first married." It's a marriage that's growing in love. That's what we want. But our culture is offering very different views about what love is, about sexuality, and even about marriage. Very confused understandings of marriage. In fact, the younger generation today doesn't even want to get married. More and more young people just don't even want to bother with marriage. Why bother? I've got a good job, she's got a good job, we live together, we're happy. Why do I need to get some certificate from a church? That is the state of many people's views of marriage today. A very individualistic view where we fail to see this is precisely the place where God wants to shape us. If we're called to marriage, this is the primary place that God wants to mold us, to form us in character, to form us in virtue, to form us in holiness. Is this relationship between husband and wife, and then flowing from that together, the raising of children. Because it's in this profound bond of a lifelong commitment that we find this encounter with Jesus Christ and Him calling us to deeper holiness, calling us to make greater sacrifices, growing in generosity, growing in patience, growing in forgiveness. And this profound relationship is what is going to shape us most in conforming us to Christ. There are many other things God will use, but if we're called to marriage and that vocation, this is the primary instrument He wants to use to form us. And yet our modern world is running away from that kind of intense commitment so that they're not going to be formed and challenged nearly as much. What I want to do is this today. John Paul II, he spent much of his life, much of his pontificate, thinking about love and thinking about marriage and wanting to present the world the beauty of God's plan for marriage. And he gave a series of teachings about love and sexuality and marriage that has come to be known as the theology of the body. How many of you have heard of the theology of the body? These were many addresses he gave early on in his pontificate. And what I want to do is distill those and break those down. I meet many people that love theology of the body. They're excited about it, especially many young people. But then if you say, what is it all about? They're not quite sure. Could you sum it up and explain it to someone else? I don't know. What I want to do, I want to give you today the 5 pillars for theology of the body, especially as it relates to marriage. 5 keys for unlocking theology of the body so that you can understand it yourself, but if you had to explain to someone else, this is what John Paul II was teaching about marriage from theology of the body, you could actually do this. I'm going to make this, break it down, make it really easy, concrete. You can pass this on to others, whether at your church or in your own families, your own children, if you need to. So 5 pillars of theology of the body. First pillar, and each of these points, by the way, are related to John Paul II's foundational reflections on theology of the body, and they all come from Genesis, in these early points. So there's going to be a scripture verse I'm going to attach to each one of these 5 points. So the first point, the law of the gift. The law of the gift. Genesis 1:26. Papal biographer George Weigel describes this point as the law of the gift. What does he mean? Genesis 1:26 tells us that God made man and woman in His image and likeness. And that's an expression many of us have learned from our childhood. We're made in the image of God. But what does that mean? I can't see God, so what is my being made in His image and likeness? What does that have to do with my life? I don't understand that. Well, in Genesis 1:26, God makes a very interesting statement that does shed light on the practical meaning of being made in God's image, very practical for our daily lives. And it's this: God says, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness." What strikes you about God's language there? Plural. He's using first person plural. Let us make man in our image. Why is God speaking first person plural there? Well, as some Christians have observed, and John Paul II points out, this is an early hint, an early allusion to the Trinity. The idea is that we're made in the image and likeness, not just of some higher power, not of just some supreme being up there. We're made in the image and likeness of the triune God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And that tells us a lot about our lives. We're not just made in the image of some vague deity like the Force in Star Wars. No, we're made in the image and likeness of the Trinity. Think about what is God's very inner life all about? It's about self-giving love. The Father gives himself totally in love to the Son, and the Son in return gives himself totally in love to the Father. And that very outpouring of love between the Father and the Son is so real, it's the third person, the Holy Spirit. And we're made in the image and likeness of that self-giving God. That tells us that we're made to live like the Trinity. We're made for self-giving love. This is what God has written into the fabric of our being. We are only going to find our happiness to the extent that we live like the Trinity in self-giving love. You know, one of John Paul II's favorite quotes from Vatican II was this. He quoted it all the time. Man finds himself only when he makes himself a sincere gift to others. Man finds himself only when he makes himself a sincere gift to others. The idea is that we're only going to find our fulfillment, our happiness in life, when we make our lives a gift to others, to God and to the people God has placed in our lives. The problem is in our day and age, many people just grasp at things. They think if I just have more stuff, or I got more success, or if I could just have more fame, if I can just get the latest iPhone, if I could just have this, then I'm going to be happy. But John Paul II is reminding us, no, we're made to live like the Trinity, which isn't about grasping at things for ourselves. It's about giving, total giving. Mother Teresa put it very simply. She said, unless a life is lived for others, it's not worth living. And so this is the law of the gift. It's the idea that written into our very hearts is this law of self-giving, that we're made to live for others and for God. And only to that extent will we find our fulfillment. That's what God made us for, to live like him. Now, when it comes to marriage, let me ask you all this. How many of you, I don't know if this ever happens in your marriage, do you ever have selfishness in your marriage, by any chance? Do you ever have selfish moments? Does that ever happen? I mean, you're all really good, devout Christians and all, right? You know, so maybe that doesn't happen with you. But you know, this is the drama of our lives, is that God has called us to this unique vocation where we're intimately involved with this other person, and a lot of our weaknesses and sins are going to come out in this. You know, we're made for self-giving, but many times we focus more on just what I get out of the relationship with the other person, and that happens even in marriage. Many times we could focus on, well, what do I prefer? What do I want to eat? Where do I want to go? What do I want to do for vacation? What do I need right now? Do you remember when you first got married, did you ever think you would fight about money? You know, many young people just go into their marriage, oh, you know, we'll never fight about money. Who needs money? We've got love. You know, and then 5, 10, 20 years in their marriage, you've got one person who is the very detailed accountant-like person, wants to have the budget and know exactly where things go and how it all fits, and very good planning and very prudent and cautious. And then you have the other person that's a free spirit and just, oh, look, there's a sale, you know, or, hey, we could do this here. And does that ever happen in some of your marriages where money all of a sudden becomes an issue? And it's a great opportunity, because what we have to do in that moment, just use this as an example, is it's not about what I want to do with the money or what she wants to do with the money, but in this profound communion, we have to ask, what is best for our marriage? And what's best for our family? So it's not spending money on the hobbies I like, or saving up money because I just like to be secure all the time, but what is truly best for our family, and coming together on that. Some people have pointed out, this is very bold and radical here, so I hope I don't offend anybody with my next statement and you don't throw me out, but John Paul II makes this point, and I agree with him. Are you ready? Men and women are different. I know that can be really controversial in some settings here, but John Paul II said it, and I agree. And something that some people pointed out, there are many differences in men and women, and they each have their own genius that they bring to the world and to their own relationships. It's great. But one of the differences has to do with, some people have said, with the need for conversation. That we all as human beings have a need for conversation, and that men have a certain need and women have an even greater need. In general, and this isn't true for everybody, I don't want to stereotype, but a lot of people pointed this out. I came across one study, and I don't know how scientific all this was, so don't hold me to it, but at least I think it might express a point, that the average man needs about 12,000 words a day to talk. And the average woman needs about 25,000 words a day to feel like she's connected with other people. So in my life, what that means is I'm at work, and at my work at the Augustine Institute, I'm teaching, so I'm doing a lot of talking with the students, I'm in meetings all day, doing a lot of talking, and then my wife is at home with our little children, reading Curious George Rides a Bike about 5 times a day, and she's longing for adult conversation. So when I'm driving home and I come into the front door, I've already at about 11,998. And my wife is just getting started, and she's thinking, adult conversation! Hey, honey, how was your day? And I'm saying, it was good, 12,001. How'd that meeting go, she says. And I reply, fine, 12,002. And I love my wife, and I really do like talking with her, but there's moments where I go, I just want to go read the paper. I just want to go find out the scores, or I just want to go get changed and be quiet for a little bit, and maybe just wrestle with the kids where I don't have to do much talking. And that's me. And if conversation's all about me, then I'm just going to go look at the scores, read the paper, play with the kids, and tell my wife later. But I realize conversation's it shouldn't just be about me. We're called to self-giving. And I know that she needs me to converse with her. So she needs me to spend time talking to her and say more than just one-word answers. And so what I used to do early on in marriage, I would try to then ask her questions, which is good, But in the end, she wants me to actually share a little bit about my life. I'm not the sharing and caring kind of guy, I just have to be honest, but I know that that's helpful for her and our communion together. And that's a small example of getting out of ourselves and not just focused on self, but focused on what's good for the other person. So that's money, it could be conversation, or it could be anything. But here's the key. In our world today, we don't have a clear understanding of love. Everybody, when they think of what love is, they think love is just about feelings. It's just about emotions. It's about some kind of warm, fuzzy sentiment. And we're just going to have this warm feeling all through our lives, and it's going to be wonderful. And then those feelings fade in the middle of just life as it gets going, and people wonder, where's the love? But we have to realize what love is. The Catechism of the Catholic Church teaches that love is to will the good of another. It's to will the good of another. It's to seek what's best for the other person. And that goes beyond feelings. I'll give an example from some priests I know who have done marriage preparation. I remember one priest said this. He said, do you want to know what the definition of marriage is? It's never getting to do what you want. And he meant that somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but there was a truth he's pointing at that involves a real dying to myself and to my own preferences, to what I want to do all the time, to serve this other person, to serve the needs of the family. I remember in graduate school, a friend of mine had gotten married over the summer. I hadn't seen him for a few months. We came back together in the fall, and I said, hey, Mike, how's married life? And he just looked down and shook his head and sighed. I said, oh, no, what's wrong? He said, I never realized how selfish I was until I got married. How many of you could say that, right? We all knew we were selfish, but all of a sudden you're put into marriage, then you realize how selfish you are. And by the way, my friend Mike, he said that before any children came. Children have a whole other way of calling you to higher levels of generosity and patience and sacrifice. I'll give a story about this. I remember when our sixth child was born. little Josephine. You know, when you have a newborn in the house, parenting really is just about chronic sleep deprivation. You know, you just don't sleep at all. And this baby's getting up all night long. But something happened with our sixth child that never happened before. At about maybe 7 or 8 weeks, Josephine, our little baby, slept through the night. I couldn't believe it. I was so excited. I was thrilled. This is wonderful. The baby slept through the night. I woke up, I pinched myself. I got 6.5 hours of straight sleep. I feel like a human being again. This is great. And so the next night, I was all excited, thinking, I'm going to get another night of sleep. This is going to be wonderful. Get another night of sleep. But guess what happened? No, Josephine slept through the night. But let me tell you about her older brother. She has an older brother he's our most sanguine, warm, enthusiastic boy. And he just loves to play with people. He's very outgoing and friendly. I come home and he comes jumping into my arms and he just goes, Daddy's home. And to this day, he's just so energetic and he's so fun. But on this particular night, this little boy, he discovered how to climb out of his crib. And he was climbing out of his crib and going to wake up his older brothers. And he said, outside, play soccer, outside at 2 a.m. He wanted to go play soccer. And the older brother said, Dad, Lukey's in our bed. Can you come get us? And so I got to go, Luke, you got to get in your bed. So I put him back down. And then he stays in his bed for about 15 minutes. I'm starting to doze off. And all of a sudden I hear the girls say, Dad, Luke's in our bed now. He was in there saying, downstairs, play trains, downstairs, play trains at 2:30 in the morning now. You know? And I put him back in. Then he gets out again and he's downstairs and he's climbing up on counters, making snacks. And I get back in your crib. So, and I'm on about every half hour. And this went on day after day after day. One night, little Lukey, he even made himself an espresso. I kid you not. Every morning I have this routine where I go down, I have a little espresso, I press the button, and then I sip my coffee. And Lukey usually comes with me when he was this young, and he'd sit and pray with me. And so he just must have been really observing, because he was going around sipping espresso at 4 a.m. And he's wired enough without caffeine. So I want you to think about this. Love is a lot more than feelings, isn't it? And I realized I have to get up and serve the family and serve the good of Luke and let my wife try to catch some sleep because she's nursing the baby all the time. So do you think I had many feelings as I was having to chase Lukey down in his nighttime escapades? I did have feelings, but they weren't the warm, cuddly feelings. They were the high blood pressure of kind of feelings, you know? But this is just the kind of daily dying to self that we're all called to do. So that's the foundational point I wanted to discuss, the law of the gift. This is what we're made for. This is where we are going to find our happiness in life. This is where we're going to find the great freedom to love. Because if we don't have the habit, if we don't have the regular practice, the skill of making sacrifices, small sacrifices day in and day out, we're not going to be free to love our spouse and our children well, because we're always going to be wanting to do what we want all the time. We need to live the law of the gift so that we can love. All right, that's the first point. Second point, man's original solitude. Genesis 2:18. It is not good for man to be alone. Do you remember that? God creates Adam, puts him in the garden. Then God says it's not good for man to be alone. That's a little strange, isn't it? Is Adam really alone? Didn't God put trees and flowers around? Didn't God put in there giraffes and monkeys and cows and zebras? And Adam's not alone, is he? Well, that statement, John Paul II points out, that statement tells us that there's something about Adam that is not found in other animal creatures, other bodily creatures. So Adam's with these other flesh and blood creatures, and he's a flesh and blood creature, but he's described as being alone. That tells us there's something going on in Adam that's not going on in the animals. He has a spiritual dimension, a soul. And this is a problem, because in the first point we saw Adam was made for self-giving. But we see here he doesn't have an equal partner to give himself to in this profound kind of relationship. Adam's made for the law of the gift. He's made to give himself in a mutual relationship, of love, but there's no one like him, no equal partner, no other body, soul, creature to give himself to. And that's why God says it's not good for man to be alone. And that leads us to our third step, original unity. Genesis 2, verses 21 through 24. You know the story. Adam falls asleep, and God creates the woman from Adam's side. Adam wakes up and says, "At last, bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh." And the scriptures say that the two become one flesh. John Paul II, reflecting on this, highlights how when man wakes up from the sleep and he sees his bride, he says, "At last." And that sigh, it expresses Adam's longing to live the law of the gift, but he hasn't had anyone to live the law of the gift with, and now he has his bride. Now there's someone he can give himself to in this unique way. He's finally complete, in a sense, that he can become what he was meant to be through his union with her, and that's a beautiful view of marriage. The man she was created to be with is not fully himself until he was united with her, and vice versa. It's a beautiful view. And the two become one flesh. And here we come to a very important point that John Paul II describes. So we're still under the unity of man and woman. And that last line in Genesis 2:24, where it describes the two becoming one flesh, John Paul II says that this passage points to the profound union, the meaning of the profound union of man and woman in marital intimacy. That in giving of their bodies to each other, they're not just joining themselves to each other physically for pleasure, but that physical joining of their bodies actually expresses a profound personal communion, a spiritual union. And remember, we're body, soul creatures. So what I do in my body actually expresses my very self. I remember a long time ago, one of my kids had a little Nerf football, and he was throwing it around the living room. I said, "Don't throw this around because you might break something." And I came back in, and I saw the Nerf football on the other side of the living room again. I said, "Hey, did you throw the football over there?" He said, "No." I said, "Well, who did it?" He said, "My hand did it." That's pretty funny for a little toddler, right? But what if I came up to you and slapped you in the face? And then you said, "Hey, why'd you do that?" I said, "Oh, I didn't do that. My hand did it." Are you going to buy that? I don't think so. Because we all know what we do in our bodies really expresses our soul. And the most profound act that we can do in our bodies, in marital intercourse, it is not just about a physical action, but what we do in our bodies expresses our very souls, our very self. And so this physical communion expresses a profound spiritual communion. In giving their bodies to each other, it is an expression of total love, total trust. They're giving their very selves to each other. The two become one flesh. All right, so far we've got the three pillars. The law of the gift, man's made to live like the Trinity and self-giving. Secondly, original solitude, Genesis 2:18. It's not good for man to be alone. And so man was made for the law of the gift, but he doesn't have anyone to give himself to. Then we come to the third point, which we just looked at, and that was original unity. So God creates the bride, and now Adam has someone to give himself to. But I want to consider the fourth point, and this is one that's sometimes overlooked. John Paul II himself says this is foundational for understanding his teachings in the theology of the body, and it's what he calls original nakedness. Original nakedness. Genesis 2:25 gives us this verse. They were naked and not ashamed. Now let's talk about that for a while. Do you ever wonder about that verse? Adam and Eve were naked and not ashamed. What do they mean by that? Do you ever let's be honest. Have you ever wondered about that? There's some texts in the Bible that we have to admit, that's weird. Yeah. That's just weird. That's strange. Or why did that happen? Why did God do that? And many Christians, what they do is they look at it and they go, well, that's just Bible world. Things in Bible world don't have to make sense. So we just read over it and we just move on. But let's just take this verse out of the Bible world for a moment, okay? And let's just say you're here at this conference and all of a sudden you get a text message from a friend and your text message from your friend says, "Hi, I'm naked and I'm not ashamed." You said, "Whoa, that's too much information. What are you doing?" That's weird, right? But you take those same words, you put it in the Bible and we read, oh, they're naked and not ashamed. That's holy. You make the sign of the cross and you move on. Come on. We should dare to ask the question, what does this mean? John Paul II dares to ask. And he talks about how shame involves fear of another person. I'm afraid that this other person may not understand me. I'm afraid that they may hurt me. I'm afraid they may use me. It's ultimately, shame involves a fear of being vulnerable, a fear of letting the other person see me as I really am. That's what shame is. And the beauty of Adam and Eve's relationship in the original marriage and God's plan for marriage, they didn't have any shame. They didn't have those barriers in their relationship. They didn't have any of that kind of insecurity. They were naked and not ashamed. Their physical nakedness points to a certain personal nakedness. They were able to bare their very souls to each other. Imagine being in a relationship like that. What I want you to do right now here in the next 5 minutes or so is really give me your fullest attention, okay? Because what I'm going to share with you next, I think, is one of the most beautiful points from John Paul II about what he really wanted for marriage, and I don't want you to miss it. So can you give me your best attention right now? What I'm going to do is take you back in a time machine, and we're going to go all the way back to the Garden of Eden, before the fall, and I want you to picture yourself in a relationship like this. You're Adam, you're Eve, imagine this marriage. There's no sin, there's no selfishness, there's total honor in this relationship. They're living totally in self-giving love. So they're always seeking what's best for the other person. So just imagine being in a relationship like that. John Paul II says that Adam looked at Eve as a great gift. And he looked at her with the vision of the Creator, is what he said. Man and woman looked at each other with the vision of the Creator. And what does that mean? That means that Adam, for example, looked at Eve and saw in Eve much more than a beautiful woman. I'm sure she was gorgeous, but Adam saw something more than just her physical good looks. Adam saw in Eve someone who was much more than just a feminine companion, a close female friend. He saw in her someone who was more than just a helpmate. She was certainly a helpmate, but it was more than that. It wasn't just like, hey, okay, we got a lot of work to get done in the garden here. I'm so glad you're here, Eve. We can divide and conquer this place. And, she was a great help, but she was much more than that. Adam saw Eve the way God saw her. And how did God see her? Do you remember when God created the sun, moon, and stars? What did God say? It is good. Then God creates the birds and the fish, and he says, it is good. Then he creates the beasts on the land, the animals, and God says it is good. But at the end of God's created world, at the end of his creation, God says on the seventh day, it is very good. And what did he just finish creating? The man and the woman, made in his image and likeness. And God is admiring, he's marveling over especially man and woman, the human persons. And he says, it is very good. And so Adam looks at Eve the way God looks at her. He says, this is a daughter of God, someone who's made in the image and likeness of God. She is very good. And he can't believe that she wants to give herself to him. Let's think for a moment what that means. Remember, Adam and Eve were given free will, right? They could do whatever they want in their lives. They have free will. And when I teach this in a classroom, I draw a little stick figure on one end of the chalkboard of Eve, and then on the other end of the chalkboard is Adam. So on the Eve side, I draw all these arrows coming out from Eve in all these different directions, showing that Eve could do whatever she wants with her life. She could have said, I'm going to be a lion tamer, or I'm going to go tend to a rose garden, or I'm going to have a vineyard. So she could have done whatever she wanted, but she chose to not do all those things. She chose to commit her will to this other person, to Adam, to seek what is best for him, because love is to will the good of another, to seek what's best for the other person. And in that process, there's a certain dying to herself. There's a certain sacrifice of her free will. She freely chooses to limit her freedom out of love for Adam. I love Adam so much, I'm not going to do all these other things. and she commits her will to this man, to seek what's best for him, to seek what's best for their union in their marriage, and to seek what's best for any children that may come from their marriage. And so here's Adam considering all this, saying, this beautiful daughter of God, the crown jewel of God's creation here, who is made in his image and likeness, who is very good, who could have done anything she wanted in her life, she's choosing to commit herself to me. I'm not worthy of such a great gift. Adam had a profound sense of responsibility, a profound sense of responsibility to care for Eve as a profound gift. Now, let me ask you this, just for a little analogy. What am I holding here? Okay, it's a clear glass. Let's just say, it's a plastic glass here, but let's just say for sake of discussion, it's a crystal sculpture. That this is $1 million crystal sculpture. It's made with Venetian glass. Let's say it was an heirloom passed on from my family in Italy down the generations from the Renaissance period. It's worth $1 million. And let's say this isn't a Catholic event here. This is the art festival in the local community, and we're all admiring each other's pieces of art, okay? So let's say I come here. What is your name?
Tanya.
I'm sorry?
Tanya.
Tanya, can you please hold my $1 million crystal sculpture? Now, how do you feel holding my $1 million crystal sculpture?
Nervous to break it?
A little nervous to break. I notice you're using two hands. Why are you using two hands?
Because I don't want to break it.
You don't want to break it, right? Because if there's any damage done to this, it's going to be really rough. So that's Tanya. How about you, Barb? Would you like to hold my $1 million? You look a little nervous there. Yeah. How are you feeling?
A little nervous.
Yeah, once again, a little uncomfortable because you want to be so careful, right? Yes. But do you think Barb and Tanya, do you think they did a good job holding my $1 million? Let's give them a round of applause. I think they did a great job there. Okay, now what is your name here? So Mary, okay, so Mary, let's say Mary has her own $1 million crystal sculpture. Would you let Tanya or Barb hold your sculpture, given how gentle and careful they were? Would you let them hold it? Yeah, probably, okay. And if I came to you and said, oh, can I hold it, please? So Mary's going to let me hold it. Let's say I took this $1 million crystal sculpture and I started playing catch with it, throwing it up in the air, juggling with it, and then let's say all of a sudden I dropped it. Oh, no! And it shattered all over the floor. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, no. You're not happy with me, are you, Mary? Now, let's say Carrie over here has her own $1 million crystal sculpture, and she just saw the way I treated Mary's sculpture. I was juggling with it and shattered all over the floor. And if I come up to you, Carrie, and say, hey, Carrie, can I hold your sculpture? What are you going to do? Oh, she's hiding it. What's going on here? Why? Why are you doing that? Why'd you do that?
Should take better care of it than you.
Yeah, you don't think I'm going to take good care of it, right? You're a little nervous about that sculpture. I'm not going to take care of it. Well, I want you to see this. Adam had a profound sense of responsibility of the gift that Eve was giving her. That Eve, who could have done anything with her life, chose to give herself, her very heart, to Adam, to commit her will to his good, the good of their marriage, and the good of any children that may come from that marriage. And Adam is in awe over this gift, and this gift is worth much more than $1 million crystal sculpture. Adam had a profound responsibility for the gift. It was as if he was holding Eve's heart in the palm of his hand. And so with every word spoken, he wanted to be so careful not to do anything that may damage this gift, not to do anything that may hurt this wonderful gift. And with all of his interactions, want to be, again, so careful. Imagine being in a relationship like that. Imagine being in a marriage like that. Would you feel comfortable giving your heart to someone that was going to be so responsible like that? Absolutely. Absolutely. Adam and Eve had this. They were naked and not ashamed. They had total security, total trust. And that kind of responsibility, that sense of responsibility for the gift, creates an environment where the other person then feels that they can be vulnerable, they can let the other person see them as they really are. And isn't that what we most deeply long for? A relationship where there's no fear of being used, no fear of being misunderstood, no fear of being hurt, no fear of being rejected, total security, total trust. This is what Adam and Eve had in their original relationship. How many of you have a marriage like that? None of us do. Some of us may come close, but all of us, because of original sin, have the selfishness that builds walls. And that's the fifth point, original shame. Genesis 3:10, after the fall, they were naked and now they were ashamed. Once sin enters the world, man is capable of selfish acts. John Paul II reflects on this, that Adam all of a sudden realizes that he can do things that might hurt Eve. He could put his own interests over what's really good for her. That he could say something that could hurt her. And so think about that. Once Adam realizes that he could do something to hurt her, guess what else he realizes? She can do something to hurt him. And when that happens, what does Adam do? Is he going to be willing to give his heart to his bride anymore? No, he's going to pull back. And this is what John Paul II calls the walls of shame. The walls of shame, fear, insecurity, hundreds of defense mechanisms. I won't talk about this. I don't want him to know about this. We're just not going to deal with this. We have all these dysfunctions that come up in our married lives that are a result of the walls of shame. But we saw in point 4, deep in our hearts, we long to love and to be loved. We long for that intimate communion. And this side of the Garden of Eden, in other words, after the fall, none of us are going to fully have that again. But Jesus Christ has come, and he came to redeem us, and he came to transform our selfish hearts, the selfish hearts that builds those walls in our marriages. And we could have confidence that through prayer, through calling on the graces of the sacrament that we entered into in marriage, and the graces that come from confession, from the Eucharist, that our selfish hearts can be conformed more to Christ, so that we can begin to love our spouse the way Christ loves them, so that Christ actually is living and working through me, loving my spouse and loving my children in a way that I could not do on my own. And that's the great hope that we can have, that we can find the redemption that comes in our hearts from Jesus Christ. Now, there are a couple practical points that John Paul II gives about how we can live this out, and I'm going to share with you just one of them here this evening. One practical thing that he says is very helpful for marriages is that we not only live total self-giving, but we have total acceptance of the other person. Total acceptance of the other person, even with their faults, even when they frustrate us, even when they hurt us. Now, whenever you're hurt, your spouse ever hurts you, says something and you don't feel good about it, many times we're tempted to just turn inward and we just dwell on the hurt. And we might even start to ascribe motives to the person. Oh, they're doing that just to push my buttons. We assume their bad intentions, and we might complain out loud to our friends about our spouse, or maybe we don't say anything out loud, but in our head we've got this tape going on. That's the third time he didn't say thank you. She's always that way. He's never going to change. You know, we have these things going on, and that's really the voice of the devil trying to drive a wedge between man and woman, between husband and wife. Listen to what John Paul II says about the total acceptance we're called to have. He first of all points out that if you want to measure how well you really love your spouse, ask yourself, how committed are you to him, to her, when they hurt you? The strength of love emerges most clearly, John Paul II says, when the beloved person stumbles, when his or her weaknesses or even sins come into the open. One who truly loves does not then withdraw his love, but loves all the more. Isn't that what we tend to do? If someone hurts us, we tend to withdraw our love. We pull back. That's our walls going up. But John Paul II says the one who truly loves does not withdraw his love, but loves all the more, loves in full consciousness of the other person's shortcomings and faults, and without in the least approving of them. I remember a time early on in our marriage where my wife really lived this point out very well. And I'll be honest, she gets embarrassed sometimes when I tell this story. She goes, I don't get this right all the time. Well, people know I'm really human. I got it right once. But I want to share it because it does exemplify this important point for John Paul II. Have you ever had those times in your marriage where you're just not clicking? There's a little tension between you. You know, I came home from work one day and I don't know, the chemistry wasn't there like normal. We had to go to the grocery store and I said something and she didn't take it the right way, and I didn't mean it that way. And I was like, well, I didn't mean it that way. Then that made her a little more upset. You're just not, you're just not clicking. And then we're driving home, and the tension just continues to mount. And I'm thinking, oh, great, this is going to end up in one of those blow-ups. Does that ever happen in your marriages, or is that just me? I don't know. And my wife was unloading the groceries. She's putting cans up in the cabinet, up on the shelves way up here. I'm over on the other side of the kitchen unloading groceries at the table. And have you ever said something to your spouse, and as soon as you say it, you wish you didn't say it that way? That happened right here. And it wasn't anything really bad, but it had a certain tone, just a little edge to it, And as soon as I said it, I was chasing those words, going, oh, can I get those words back? Can I get those words back? And I couldn't get them back, and they were floating out there in space. So what should we do? What should we do when we say something and we know we shouldn't say it? Well, I'll tell you what I did. I just kept unloading and hoped she didn't catch the nuance. Which wasn't the right thing to do. But I knew she caught the nuance when there was a can about to go into that top shelf, and all of a sudden the can just stayed there in her hand, up in midair. And then she slowly brings it down back to the counter. And she put both hands on the counter and took a big, deep breath. And I saw that. And I said, oh no, I'm dead. Oh, I'm dead. This is gonna, oh boy, I'm in the doghouse tonight. This is bad. But my wife, right at this moment, instead, just simply looked at me and she said, you didn't mean that, did you? With a little smile. And that was a great moment. Because notice, she wasn't being a doormat, letting me walk on her. She wasn't just saying, oh, it's okay, or Ted, can you say more dumb things? I just love it when you're a jerk. Could you? She didn't do that, right? She was acknowledging something was off, right? But she didn't pounce on me with it either. What do we tend to do when we're hurt? We tend to defend ourselves. We get angry. She could have said, why are you talking that to me? That's not fair. Why did you say that? And we get really defensive. And that's always really good for conflict resolution, right? Because it makes the other person just be very kind and forgiving, right? No, we just dig in. The other person digs into the trenches, and that's what I would have done. I probably would have gone counter-defensive. A friend of mine who's a marital counselor, he says, the second person always starts the fight. The second person starts the fight. One person says something, and maybe they didn't really mean it, or it's a little mistake, but what does the second person do with that? That's the key. Because you can either take this in one direction that's going to lead to greater tension, greater anger, greater division, or you could turn it in a way that diffuses it and gives the other person a chance to say sorry. Because she knew I was already feeling badly. She knew I had a sense I shouldn't have said it that way. So it gave me the great chance to say sorry. So she could have yelled at me, but what else could she have done? She could have thrown the can at me, yeah. Yeah, that's right. But something even worse than yelling or throwing the can. What is it? Silence. Right? Silence. She could have said nothing and just kept putting cans in. I'd say, hey, honey, are you okay? And she could just look at me. And keep putting cans in and not say anything. Yeah, I've met couples. I've done a lot of marriage retreats and marriage conferences. I've met couples that told me how horrible silence is. I remember one couple said, we were silent for 3 days. 3 days not talking to each other. And then we finally said sorry, and we wondered, why didn't we do this earlier? So it gave me the chance to just, I didn't feel attacked, but it gave me a chance to say, I'm sorry. And that's what I did. I said, honey, I'm sorry. Forgive me, I didn't mean that. I knew I shouldn't have said it. And we have what I like to call in my marriage, the marriage confessional. Things like this, you have to say sorry. Because many couples won't say anything. They sense there was a little awkward moment, a little bit of tension, but they never really address it. They don't want to fully admit I was wrong. So they just kind of go on with their day, and then 4 hours later, they come up and talk again, and you're wondering, is everything okay now? Or maybe can I joke around now again? But you're a little bit on eggshells, and it's just not real. We've got to just be honest and just own up for, even if the other person did something, own up to your part of the responsibility. What did you do wrong? And that's why we always say in the marriage confessional, so to speak, I am sorry. Just come right out and say it. I am sorry. I'm sorry I did this. And then my wife, on the other hand, she puts her hand on my head and she says, I absolve you. I'm just kidding. No, she doesn't. No, but the other person has to say, I forgive you. I forgive you. Because sometimes that doesn't happen. One person says sorry, and then the other person goes, oh, cool. I got him in sorry mode now. I'm going shopping. Yeah. So I forgive you, and then it's done. Then it's done, and then you can move on. And that's what happened that night. I said, I'm sorry. She said, I forgive you. And then the whole thing was resolved. And we went on to enjoy our evening together. It's a small thing that helps to tear down the walls of shame and build deeper union in our marriages. It's the love of Jesus, right? When Jesus is on the cross, he's dying, and all these people are doing horrible things to him, mocking him, crucifying him. And he doesn't say in anger, God, come down with your wrath on these people. No. But he also doesn't say, oh, it's okay, no big deal. No. What does he say to God the Father? Do you remember? Father, forgive them. But then what does he say? Does he say, because, oh, it's just okay? No, he says, Father, forgive them because they don't know what they do. Isn't that true? In so much of our married lives, a lot of stuff just comes up, and usually we don't really mean it. We don't really understand what we're doing. And we need to be aware that the other person that may be doing things that frustrate us, they don't understand what they're doing fully. And so on that day, it was as if my wife looked up to heaven and said, Father, forgive Ted. He never knows what he's doing. All right. Well, thank you so much. This is such a delight to be here with all of you. I'll just share with you this, that I'm going to be sharing, or everything that I talked about here is in this book that I wrote called Men, Women, and the Mystery of Love, Practical Insights from John Paul II's Love and Responsibility. And this could be a great resource. Many people who've been married 10, 20, 30 years have told me, wow, this has been so helpful for our marriages. We wish we learned this when we were younger. Many people around the country are using this for marriage preparation. Many young people, high school kids and college students, are using this in high school programs and learning about the skills of love, what John Paul II is teaching about friendship and relationships with the opposite sex. So this, out of all the books that I've written, I would say this is the one I get the most profound feedback on every week. I hear someone contacts me about how this has changed their lives. And I want to be very clear, and I mean this with all sincerity, it is not me. The quotes I was giving you, weren't they profound? They weren't from me, they were from John Paul II. It's his wonderful teaching and his insights on this matter. So in our culture where we need to reclaim our understanding of love and marriage, God's plan for love and marriage, I hope this can be a good resource for you. Thank you so much, and God bless you.
We hope you've enjoyed this presentation brought to you by Parousia. Parousia is an Australian-based apostolate bringing you the best in Catholic formation resources. Visit the website at www.parousiamedia.com. Thank you for listening, and may God richly bless you and your family.